Hi everyone, this is Dragon GGY bringing you a little early the operator hindsight for the latest CNY limited operator Yu. Let's get into it. Yu is a 6-star primal protector in the defender class. Trait of the archetype, blocks 3 enemies and can inflict elemental injury. Primal protector is a very new archetype introduced 2 months ago with Feline. Let's check out the stats build. Looking across the board, primal protectors have the lowest defense. They trade part of their defensiveness, both in terms of max HP and defense, for higher attack, which is very important for dealing elemental injury. So overall, I say their stats are below average. That will also include the longer attack interval and higher DP. All that as compromise for some greater functions. So let's go over the elemental part again. PSA, the global server, have now fixed the translation problem that I pointed out in Virtuosa's episode, and there's now an official name for the damage to the EHP bar. It's elemental injury, which I used to call elemental impairment in this series. So we're sticking to the official term from now on. Primal protectors are injury dealers. If you've watched the Nymph episode, that's the can opener. They deal injury based on attack, which is the same as ritualists. However, they don't directly deal E damage, the actual damage, which is the job of Primal Caster and an upcoming archetype Primal Guard. Compared to Ritualists, they have a much smaller range, obviously, and thus not as efficient in dealing multi-target injury. They don't have E damage boosting support, which honestly is understandable, and instead they have the ability to tank or help allies tank E damage. But how does that work out though? Honestly, giving more options to the injury inducer plus E damage dealer combo and breaking them into different major classes is understandable, but for sustaining E damage as a differentiation, there is a very dominant archetype currently for that job, Wandering Medic. They can heal any EHP range, which in itself is a powerful mechanic. Primal Protector's design has some generic resilience against E damage, but still has a designated type of element that they specialize in, like Ritualists. So for the moment, they are more utilized like a ground version of Ritualist. Next, let's take a look at Burn as an element, which is the element for you. Burst effect, enemy takes 7000 E damage on burst trigger and 20 resistance shred for a 10-second duration. Compared to Necrosis, that's a lower total damage, but they are front-loaded instead of dealt over time, which can help burst down enemies a little bit faster. The 20 resistance shred is also definitely miles better than the Enfeeble. It's stable and provides a 10-second window where odds damage becomes more effective. So if we look at the burn system as a whole, we can find that most operators, including the inducers and the damage dealers, are usually equipped with short duration, short cycle skills, which makes a lot of sense because you are taking advantage of the short burst window. Some has the ability to amplify the spike E damage on burn burst. Here's the 2 burn primal casters we have right now. Blaze Altar deals an extra burst of E damage whenever someone enters burn burst on the field. Wami, as a budget version, limit that to only her range, but the principle is the same. Blaze Altar Skill 3, a 20/30 skill, can drain all the ammo within 7.5 seconds, fitting in the burst duration perfectly. Wami Skill 2 is a 12/20 skill with 15 seconds duration, but you can charge it to make it 30, usually for when you want to cover 2 burst durations. If you dig deeper, you may find skills like Bobbing Skill 2, Yu Skill 2, or even module deltas like Everest Skill 3 and Viviana, or has similar and short cycle designs. And for E damage dealers in the burn system, they would still mostly deal art damage, with E damage being supplementary like 1-to-1 at most, which is in contrast with Necrosis, who would mostly or even only deal E damage. So let's recap the friendly elements. Necrosis is for dealing E damage as a pseudo-true damage solution, which we discuss over and over with Nymph. They usually have long cycle, long duration, and surely higher total damage. Most of the damage in their output is E damage, with Nymph doing 100% E damage in burst. Burn, on the other hand, leans more towards an arts support. The resistance shred is a key, amplifying arts damage, and E damage serves more as an supplement. They have short cycle, short duration skill designs, and a lot of burst damage. The goal is very clear, they want enemies dead ASAP. They usually deal around 1-to-1 odds to E damage, and E damage usually takes up even less. And for nerve, this is an early observation because so far we have very limited pieces to the system, so instead of going for damage, they are more crowd control oriented. Compared to the other two, they deal less damage. Sometimes the burst cooldown can even be shortened for higher coverage, and may come with other crowd controls to ensure the effectiveness. Corrosion is not here yet. Now let's take a look at Yu's talent. Talent 1, when blocking an enemy, gains 25% Sanctuary, 30% at potential 3, and the blocked enemy takes 40% of attack as arch damage and 12% of attack as burn damage per second. Let's break it into two parts. First, the tanking. Use tanking via Sanctuary, aka damage reduction. The higher the incoming DPH, the bigger the on-paper return. On the physical end though, usually protectors or sentry protectors who have higher defense and defense modifiers would be more reliable, barring DPH that are way beyond everyone's defense. The talent works alongside talent 2 and max HP increase found in all his skills. This is tanking with the combination of damage reduction plus high max HP plus max HP percentage based passive recovery, which is the same principle of the popular OPNS and Gladiator duo. But in practice, outside of some extreme scenarios, for example, Patriots Phase 1 and Steam Knight's Tri-Hit with high DPH burst damage, Primal Protector's ability to tank is decent enough, but since the Sanctuary is only active when blocking, they are weaker against high-threat ranged enemies. Next, the talent deals Art and Burn DOT to all blocked enemies, so that's already greater damage efficiency than most defensive protectors. The standard Art DOT is 286 and Burn at 85.8. That translates to triggering bursts in 12 seconds for non-boss and 24 seconds for boss enemies. It also synergizes with attack increase in skill 2 and skill 3 to increase the block damage efficiency. With skill 2, you also get a forced blocking mechanic, which is great. Key takeaway here is that 1. Potentials for Yu don't actually change the DOT part of this talent. There's also no attack increase for his potential set, so the breakpoints are only affected by your operator level, which is great news for F2P. What's a shame and clearly a disadvantage is that the whole talent only takes effect when blocking enemy, so against unblockable enemies, this talent is literally doing nothing. Talent 2, when there are 4 or more operators on the field, recover 1.5% of max HP, 2% at potential 5, as both HP and EHP per second. The actual numbers are on the right, and it is quite different with or without potential on this part. This talent scales with max HP increases, as expected. The effect on actual HP regen is moderate, especially after Thorn's Altar last episode where you can see passive HPS at 200+. So under higher pressure, be it in or out of skill, I wouldn't say he's completely free of extra healing just from this talent. But on the EHP side of things, this talent is indeed something, because no matter who you are, you always have 1000 EHP max, so 55 to 78 EHP recovery per second is very noticeable. As a comparison, the same effect of AR Altar Skill 1 post warm-up is 55. So against most environmental E damage, it's very manageable. I think a popular context here is the Mark of Epoch, which deals 100 per second and 130 at higher difficulties. When scaled with relics and behind-the-scene preparations though, the EHP recovery may sometimes allow you to bathe in it. Whether or not the condition is easy to trigger though, depends on your usage. If you want him for early lane holding, it can be difficult to meet the condition. But if you're using him alongside all the burn teammates, I think 4 ops on field including himself is not really a big ask. Yu doesn't have a module yet, at least in 6 months, so let's take a look at the skills. My recommendation, skill 2 over skill 3 over skill 1. Skill 2 brings a forced teleportation mechanic, which is already a game-changing mechanic and opens up a lot of strategies that were not possible before. It also comes with great burn efficiency and lane holding ability to serve the base job. Skill 3 is an enchantment skill that adds burn damage on friendly art damage, so that opens up a lot of synergies with art damage dealers, most notably the 6-star Megacore casters with their full map attacks. It's relatively easy to utilize and is powerful in daily contents. Skill 1 is a possible countermeasure to certain high-threat range enemies, but not irreplaceable. For most players, all you need to know is that it's not very competitive with the other two skills, which both have very clear and major applications. Skill 1, Passive Effect, Taunt Level +1. When activated, gets max HP plus 70%, defense plus 70%. When attacked, deal 50% of attack as burn damage to the attacker. This is a 0/16, 30 seconds defensive recovery skill. Stats are as follows. Like I mentioned, Yu doesn't have a module, so I'm just filling the table with potentials being the only variable. I think the main focus here should be the burn damage reflection in skill, which is 357.5. The skill being defensive only and a constant taunt +1 makes good sense. Usually taunt increase is a in-skill only thing, so having that be a passive make him reliable as a mid-shield, and is beneficial for him getting this skill up. Non-boss enemies can get knocked into burn burst in 3 hits, and that burn damage was stacked with his talent 1 against blocked enemies, which is also nice. But in practice, the application is very limited. The skill doesn't buff his own damage, so in terms of lane holding, it's no match for skill 2. As a countermeasure to ranged enemies, part of this on-paper application may also be done by using skill 3 instead, so that's another share of the cake. So using this skill comes down to very specific situations, for example high threat full map attacking ranged enemies, perhaps even invisible like the armorless Union archers with the Neo-like gimmick, but even with that, sometimes Penance skill 3 is the better choice. And compared to Penance, it only reflects burn damage and not arts damage, which in itself is a backloaded pattern. If the enemy has more than 7000 HP, they're gonna survive the whole burst, during which they don't further take damage, and you'll have to wait for the next cycle. And that's not a very good news for the tank line. If you are determined enough to use this skill, I may recommend the combo with Ek skill 2. Ek skill 2 hits you for 15 times, which is almost enough for the full skill. They also have the same duration, and Ek can provide even more defense and max HP to you, which is one of the ways to sustain him. Now skill 2 immediately deals 100% of attack as arch damage to all enemies in range and teleports ground enemies in the range who have a viable path to you to his position. Block +2, max HP +160%, attack +290%. Normal attacks deals arch damage. This is a 20/26, 20-second auto skill. The range is the typical diamond range or the Texas skill 2 range. Numbers are shown here, quite the extensive list. Yu gets to 10k plus max HP in skill, which translates to 203 HPS with talent 2. You get quite the attack stat, dealing 2.78k per hit, with 1.1k arts DOT and 334.6 burn DOT when blocking. The total damage potential for this skill is 71k, not too shabby for a 20-second skill from a defender. As always, let's start with the mechanics. Here's a timeline of the skill starting. You always get the stat increase on activation, so that'll apply to the starting AoE arts damage. Key takeaway is that the first empowered talent 1 tick only happens at 1.2 seconds into the skill, making the total tick in skill just 19 instead of 20, which is a tiny pity. For teleporting, you can teleport enemies who have a viable path to himself. Portals, holes, and blockages are usually considered invalid for pathing, but do look out for the red or blue box because they are viable pathways and may connect two seemingly separated areas on the map. If Yu himself, for some reason, is on a tile that cannot be reached with normal pathing like a range tile or inside a fence, the TP will also fail. There are also more exceptions. It cannot teleport enemies that are immune to teleport, usually the big ones that don't move or the ones that they don't want you to abuse for certain reasons. It also includes enemies that are invincible or untargetable or are in self-bind status. Self-bind is a commonly found status on enemies who don't move normally or stops moving temporarily. Typical example is the IS-5 ending 2 boss Teresis in his phase 2. So this part is also very different from the TP of his sister Shu. Enemies teleported will land on a random spot within any of the squares with a side length of 0.15 that extends inward from each corner of a square centered on Yu's tile, which has a side length of 0.9. So in English, that means a random corner from the tile. For other skill effects, increased attack means higher odds in burn DOT, which gives higher odds damage, with E damage as supplement, as well as resistance shred from burn burst. The 7000 burst damage is oppressive against high resistance or damage reduction enemies, who tend to have less HP, like the Sargas River Shield Guards in Chapter 14. You can see this as an offensive and upgraded version of Kurora skill 2, able to increase block count and recover HP at a higher rate if the condition is met. Of course, he also gets rid of the enemies really fast. Effectively, he is a block 5 and attack 5 unit during skill. Do keep an eye out for potential leaks though. The skill teleports all enemies in that range to you, although the first AoE hit might help with taking out some mobs. In certain scenarios, leaks may still happen. Let's talk about the implication of his teleport. It's a powerful mechanic being able to force a position change for the enemy. Compared to Shu's teleport, he doesn't need to prep the tiles and can drag enemies to a designated tile instead of just limiting their movement to a set pathway. There are two major applications. One, converging enemies. Forces enemies that aren't in the same lane together for more effective takedown. 2. Stalling enemies, basically abusing map design and enemy pathing to make them run in circles. This is especially effective against slow-moving enemies. If they are blockable, usually you just retreat him after TP, use other crowd controls to buy time for him to come back, and hopefully rinse and repeat. It's even more oppressive if the target has multiple checkpoints, because enemies will always attempt to reach the next checkpoint even when they are teleported to positions beyond those points. As long as they haven't reached there, teleporting them will also make them run in circles. Some typical examples are Cannot in IS-5's Shop Robbery and Mandragora in H96. In the future, Exia Alta with her skill 3 is able to redeploy allies, making a double TP possible with Yu, either to converge enemies in 2 different lanes into a 3rd lane, or to TP enemies twice to make them walk back even more. Tragodia's skill 2 can lure enemies, so that in conjunction can further manipulate enemies' pathing, and can also clear the enemy from being blocked by Yu, so that the process of redeploying Yu can be skipped for better coverage. Next, let's talk about combos. First, for his job as a burn enabler, it allows him to trigger burn burst in 3 Talon 1 takes. Each take does 334.6, so as a side note, you can also see how it's just barely enough. Therefore, I do recommend bringing him to level 90s, as that makes a difference between 3 ticks and 4 ticks. Anyways, that'll be enough to squeeze in 2 bursts in 1 skill for non-boss enemies, but only 1 is possible for boss. As it converges enemies together, the skill does combo with AoE damage better, and the best match would be Blaze Altar skill 3. The combo deals up to 120k damage in less than 11 seconds, which is some crazy DPS, but I'll save the details for the next episode. Overall, a short cooldown, short cycle skill, great burn efficiency, and works decent with most damage skills in the burn system. Outside of the burn system though, there are also skills that can work with him. Don't forget that he's a defender, and from the game's tutorial, you'll know that the defenders are supposed to gather up enemies for damage dealers. So here are some of the possible combos. Number 1, AoE or multi-splashing skills like Rosmonde's skill 3, Wizardel's skill 2, and skill 3. Reed Alder's skill 2 is also in this category. Placing her next to you while he drags enemies to himself makes it possible for full fireboard damage. Reed also helps to keep you alive if the enemy is highly threatening, but it does involve some RNG, as sometimes the target can end up in a corner further away from Reed. Number 2, converging enemies for your short-handed but multi-target operators. Typical examples are like Pepe, Vinna, and also Reapers, who are AoE by nature. 3, you can also force position for easier shifting. For heavier enemies, moving them for half a tile is all you can do, and using Yu to bring them close to a hole, especially when you roll the RNG to get them to the close corner, is a massive win for the strat. So closing out, the limitation of this skill should be evident. Outside of stalling, this skill does very little against enemies that cannot be blocked. The burn and arts damage just can't function without blocking, and that's again another differentiation from Shu, who is very good at bullying unblockable enemies. Skill 3, max HP, attack, and defense all plus 110%, and applies the effect of Talent 2 to all operators on the field. Creates a firewall across the entire battlefield. Other allied units deal 10% of use attack as burn damage when attacking through the firewall, and enemy projectiles have a 20% chance to be removed when passing through the wall. This is a 42/55 second skill. Stats are in the table. The main stat of the interest should be the burn enchantment number, which is 180 per hit. Starting with the mechanics, the firewall is spawned perpendicular to Yu's facing direction, 0.5 tile in front of him. So in other words, on the edge of the tile that Yu is on and facing, extending across the entire battlefield so that it can also cover operators in the same row or column to Yu. The burn damage enchantment, as I like to call it, will trigger when the damage dealer and the taker are on different sides of the wall, so it doesn't have to be projectiles. To register the burn damage, the damage dealer cannot be an enemy, and the damage taker must be an enemy. Yu's own damage, as well as non-traceable damage like Thorn's Altar Skill 2 from last episode, does not trigger the enchantment. And for the Talent 2 sharing, all you need to know is that they are based on the max HP of the recipient, not Yu himself, like Lydia's AH talent, so squishier operators also get less regen. The skill follows the same principle as Virtuosa Skill 2, dealing an additional instance of burn damage for all allied arts damage when conditions are met. The enchantment uses Yu's attack, so nothing to do with the damage dealer stats. Compared to Virtuosa Skill 2, this skill can enchant damage from any ally, whereas Virtuosa only do one and is quite picky. It can be limited by terrain though, and is less effective when enemies are coming from all directions. But most of the time, when you defend a choke point, it shouldn't be too hard to position your operators to make it work, although sometimes some enemies may not be covered. The skill only enchants arts damage though, which I think is understandable, given burn is clearly more for arts damage support. This is a long duration, long cycle skill, 55 SP requirement, 45 second duration, which is not typical in burn, but most likely to make it able to synergize with more longer cycle skills while being able to cover 2 short cycle skills. And that will include Blaze Altar Skill 3. It's usually used when Yu Skill 2 is not effective. For example, when enemies are unblockable, high threat melee, or when target is beyond the skill's reach. However, one big problem here is that the burn efficiency of this skill is just average, at least compared to his skill 2. 180.2 per instance of damage, meaning 7 hits for non-boss and 14 for boss. So for the combo with Blaze, outside of multi-target situations where Blaze can recover ammo from burn burst triggers, it can get uncomfortable knowing you need to spend ammo to help trigger burn burst first, but if you introduce a third member to help with the burst instead, it makes the combo somewhat redundant. Again, more to cover in Blaze Altar's episode. So to really play to the strength of this skill, we want skills that can deal multiple hits in one attack or with high attack speed. Skills that can best utilize the mechanic and strike far away. And yes, this is why the 6-star Mega Core casters are a great match for this skill. Lapland Altar Skill 3 deals 4 hit each attack on the drone target, 1 more hit from the AoE DOT, goes full map, and has attack speed in the module. Both their skills have very similar cycles as well, which is very important. GG's Skill 3 is a little bit behind, but still 3 hits per attack, AoE explosion, although at a much lower rate, and it's a full map skill too. Then again, compared to Scaldi Altar Skill 2 as attack buff, and Monster Skill 2 as attack speed buff, what Yu Skill 3 offers is in turn a backloaded pattern. Burn Burst provides better damage quality against high resistance or damage reduction enemies, that is, if they have enough HP to survive until the burst. So naturally, it's better against high quality enemy waves instead of trash ones. Great improvement to the damage ceiling, but less to the floor. To put that into context here, here's a graph comparing the percentage damage increase from base, which is just Lapland herself, and with all these buffs. So for Scaldi Altar, that's 39% under all resistant numbers, and 62% for Monster. The damage increase by Yu Skill 3 surpasses Scaldi beyond 30 resistance, and Monster beyond about 53 resistance. However, the calculation does assume all targets are dummies, meaning that they have infinite HP to chew at, where in reality a lot of targets won't even make it past one burst cycle, so there's no definitive answer as to who would help defeat enemies faster. It's dependent on the resistance or damage reduction and max HP composition of the target. The same rule applies to GG, who has a lower hit frequency and inherent resistance ignore. So again, I think as a conclusion, I say using Yu skill 3 with dual Mega Core casters is to prepare them for tougher enemies that they struggle to crunch through. As for other functions, the skill has defense percentage increase which skill 2 doesn't have, and may fare a bit better against high physical damage, but still far from the standard of traditional protectors. His own ability to cause burn burst is much worse than skill 2 though, and doesn't benefit from the enchantment himself like Virtuoso's skill 2. So as a whole, I say barring some physical tanking, the lane holding aspect of the skill is mostly worse than skill 2. For the projectile negation, similar mechanic to Logo's skill 3 and is more like a bonus when it happens than something that you actively utilize because it has a low trigger rate to start with, not really reliable. For summary, for working in the burn team, it's a viable enabler, yes, but since Blaze Altar is basically all we have to work with him, the skill still mostly favors multi-target situations and splits work time with skill 2 depending on the situation. Its most applicable combo is still with the Megacore Caster Duel. It's great against tougher enemies like elite breach environments or boss fights. Not as straightforward against weaker targets, yes, but in my opinion, Megacore casters themselves are already quite dominant against these enemies. And finally, the skill is mostly used as an offensive bonus. It's like a signal to strike where you activate all the skills at once, and you would position you to make the firewall mechanic work as intended instead of prioritizing him at a defensive spot. So in practice, the miscellaneous bonuses like higher defense or projectile removal are usually not that noticeable. In conclusion, Yu is a multi-function defender integrating tanking, lane holding, burn enabling, and crowd control in one. He uses high HP plus damage reduction plus max HP based recovery as the survival package, and has art and burn DOT on block to help clear enemies more effectively, which not many defenders excel. Skill 2 and 3 provides different approach to dealing burn damage effectively. He establishes a good combo with Blaze Altar in the same manner, but there are also limitations to their synergies, which I'll elaborate in Blaze episode. Skill 2 has the force teleport mechanic that packs enormous strategic value and gives him performance outside of the element system. Skill 3 adopts a longer cycle design to better synergize with a wider range of skills, but unfortunately it doesn't come with extra offensive bonuses. For his performance coming up, he can be integrated into your daily team working with the Mega Core Caster Duel, or if you just want him for general lane holding, skill 2 should do the job most of the time. Don't forget, you can include him in a 4-sway team, which you potentially may have been enjoying since last year. In other game modes, he's used for the ground branch for CCB 3, which didn't quite make it to the top, but it showed his potential quite a lot. He's able to make the Chimeras skip the Originium pollution, he's able to gather them for Winner or Pepe to do damage, so that's an honorable mention. He does have his record with Vector Breakthrough Season 1, where he uses Skill 2 to converge the event bosses, Mechanist, and his little device together for damage. For ratings, I have him at 6 with daily. The best thing about him is that as a defender, he packs decent damage alongside blocking. With his talent, he's actually a pseudo block 3 attack 3 unit, so that's decent lane holding from defender standards. But at the end of the day, it's within expectation of a defender, and his reliance on blocking is what keeping him from going higher. If you are not short on lane holders, Skill 3 is also a great add-on for your Mega Core casters, or if you wish, it does also work with most of your favorite arch damage dealers. Very good against higher quality enemies, like when there's a boss involved. For advanced, I have him at 8. His specialization mainly lies in his Skill 2 teleportation, and a little bit from his burn enabling. Usually he's not picked in IS, as relics is the best way to improve a damage dealer, instead of spending more resources on a buff provider. Not to mention that the fixed elemental damage on burst is weak in buff game modes. Not cost effective, so not popularly picked. In debuff game modes though, he fares a better chance. TP is very strong and theory crafts can go on and on, but at the end of the day it's very dependent on map and challenge. The CCP3 ground branch we just mentioned is one of the examples. When given the optimal environment, not only can we build strategies upon the TP, the fixed burst damage in a debuff game mode can also be game changing. Like with skill 2, the efficiency under halved attack is still decent. Unfortunately, can't say the same for skill 3, so skill 2 is his best and perhaps the only option in this kind of content. For pool analysis, think about your preference of the element system, and also if you want to gather the enemy bullying team with you doing the teleport. Foreseeably though, Yu is gonna be an irreplaceable piece of the burn team for a good period of time, given how he's a limited and there are just so many elements and their respective 1+1 shenanigans, so my take is that it's not gonna get new iterations very frequently. TP is my top reason for pulling him, and again, for the newbie section, he's a very good defender for newer players to have. Skill 2 is available in E1, and you're looking at a defender pool where a lot of them are either in kernel or in a limited banner, so grabbing multifunction defenders like Yu or Shu from last year, if you look out, is a great deal, because there are just so much more that they can pack in one character. For cons, I do have to, again, point out that the burn team isn't super meta since the two anchoring pieces Yu and Blaze Altar released, because the combo favors AoE scenarios where there are a lot of these high quality enemies to deal with, which isn't super prevalent, and their synergy has not reached a game-changing extent. For analogy, think about how often you use Nim's skill 3. It's a very similar situation. Nim's application was full-on pseudo-true damage, but even with that, she's still not seeing major applications in the current meta. In terms of schedule and meta, always respect a limited operator, especially when the whole package is in the same banner. Same goes for the Sway Faction Collector. If you are new and still on your way to get 4 Sway, I think getting the latest one never goes wrong. And also, if you want some next-gen daily brainlessness, this is an important add-on to acquire as well. Nothing much to say about the cons if you're not into it. Good news is that you can let go of the whole banner altogether. And we do have a trend of even more game-changing individual operators coming in 2 to 3 months. For more early details, check the previews here. I think the list may see some changes soon, as IS-6 should be releasing in CN as this video goes live. IS is a very crucial contest in this discussion. In the era of IS-5, we keep talking about how benefiting from attack speed is important because that is a norm in IS-5, which sometimes just doesn't feel that right. I'm excited to find out what they have in store for us in IS-6. But anyways, that's gonna be it for this episode. Thank you all for watching until the end. See you guys soon in the Blaze Altar episode. Bye bye.